Hey everyone, here's my Module 8 poster session. First, I'm going to give a shout out to Amy, who did a collaboration tool on Padlet, and that really helped me to kind of get used to this. I've never used it before, so thank you. Alright, so to start out, just my philosophy on teaching, I kind of took a quote from Carrie Rice: "To teach is to impart knowledge so others may learn." I think that's the whole reason why we get into teaching, is to teach our students, to get them to learn our content. And sometimes learning content is part of it, and sometimes learning how to time manage and, problem solve and things like that, that's also part of our role. So in an online environment, I would see myself as more of a facilitator. I want a learner-centered environment. I don't want to have a teacher-centered. I want to be there to guide the students. I want to be there to get them to build a community among themselves and even with me, and I want them to be able to collaborate. Those are a lot of things that I kind of took from the Rice text in that facilitator role, just to be there as a guidance for the students throughout their learning process. So this kind of brings me to the social presence model, which really is a good model for a teacher to go by. And all of those aspects can be brought upon by some of the communication that we might use. And the synchronous communication that I would plan on using in an online environment would be web conferencing and real-time chat. Being a science teacher, a lot of things are visual. And I just kind of think of, the traditional sense of the classroom and how many times I am showing my students something. And a web conferencing tool would give you the visual and the audio that the students would need. You can share content. You can, break the students out into breakout rooms like we did in our Zoom lessons, or some of us did in our Zoom lessons, to be able to help the students to collaborate and interact with each other. And the professor or teacher can go in and, involve themselves into those breakout rooms. It's also a chance for the instructor, the teacher, professor, whoever it may be, to show demos. The students aren't going to have all of those tools at home or wherever they may be, so it's something that you can do a visual, do a demo, and have a discussion about. Real-time chat is something that I would use too. It just gets the students to, again, build a community among themselves, and it gets them to interact with each other and kind of get to know each other in the online setting, because they wouldn't be right next to the person. They can't turn next to the person like they would in traditional sense and say, "Hey, what's up? What are you doing this weekend?" So it gives them that kind of little informal interaction that they could use. Moving on to asynchronous communication over here. So a couple things that I would use as an online teacher would be discussion forums and email. Discussion forums, just as we use them in this class, it can be formal, can be informal, structured and unstructured. The teacher can pose a question and then you can start a discussion. In an online sense, you could start a lesson off with, okay, you guys read this, or you watch this video, let's discuss it and let's talk about it. Or you can actually just pose questions for them to answer back to you. The other communication that I would use would be email, and this could be from teacher to student, teacher to parent, student to student. It's just more of a formal communication to kind of get that one-on-one communication that you wouldn't get in the actual online setting, during an actual lesson. You could communicate to a student, if they're struggling, or if you just need to reach out to them, you want to reach out to them, get to know each of your students a little bit more if they're struggling. Teacher to parent, you always want to have that teacher to parent relationship, traditional sense or online sense, just to make sure that you keep the lines of communication open. And student to student, they don't have that face-to-face communication. All the students will probably have phones and can text message, but at the beginning of an online class, they may not have that information for a student, so they could email another student and talk to them one-on-one, whether it be in a collaboration group where they are talking to them to see, what part of the project are they doing, where are they at, or just to, again, get to know them a little bit better and collaborate in that sense. As for differentiation, I went with the UDL guidelines here, and the three main guidelines that the UDL kind of talked about on their website are, again, engagement, representation, action, and expression. So engagement is, how are you going to engage your students? I would do this in a variety of ways, because not all students are going to interact the same way with everybody. They sometimes want to work by themselves. They sometimes want to work with their peers. And it depends on the day, and it depends on the content that you are teaching to them. So allowing them different aspects or different variety of sources that they can kind of work in to keep themselves engaged, I think is very important. And sometimes assigning them partners to work with, or sometimes picking their own partners. I do a little bit of that now in my traditional classroom, just to kind of see who they pick, and if it's more effective with them working with their friends, and if it's more effective if they're just randomly paired up. I have students tell me all the time, oh, well, we'll work together because we're good friends and we want to get things done. And sometimes that does work. And I think it would work the same in an online environment as well. Representation, students are going to gather information in different ways, and comprehend information in different ways. And so it just depends on it depends on their background. It depends on how they've been taught in past schooling, in past classes. Some of them can read and it sticks in their head. Some of them can watch a video and it sticks in their head. Some of them can simply listen to somebody give a lecture, or a tape record of a lecture, and they can get the information. So providing different means of representing that material is going to be more effective. Action expression, so the ways that they navigate the learning environment is going to be different, and it's going to depend on the student. So that kind of brings us to the accessibility. And I kind of thought of that as I was making this Padlet. I wanted to play around with the colors in the background, and I was like, you know what, I need to make something that is very visually accessible. And so I tried to make a big contrast between the background and the little boxes that I have on my Padlet here. And so making sure that the students are able to navigate, making sure that it makes sense, making sure that if there is a screen reader, that it's going to be in order, again, just as we did with our accessibility evaluations. And also expressing what the students know. Some students are very verbal. Some students are able to express themselves in a written sense. I have seen that numerous amounts of times, and I would want to be able to give the students both opportunities to be able to express themselves, especially in an online environment. If they have access to a webcam and they have access to a microphone, they can explain how to do a problem, or they can explain what their question is, as well as the chat option or an email. They can write down what their question is. They can write down what their answer is. Sometimes students might, just as I do, I can't always put my thoughts into verbalizations. I can't always explain. Sometimes I need to write it out, and then I'm like, oh, okay, that makes more sense, and then I can explain it to the person that I'm trying to get it through to. So also making sure that we have different means of expression. And moving over to my ahas and questions. So my first aha, because I have not had much exposure to online classes before, except for just me going through a few of them in my undergraduate, and a few of my grad classes as well. Online teaching is more than sitting at a screen, clicking through a lesson, and answering questions at the end. And the reason I say that is that was in my district, that is how they do their online classes or online credit recovery classes. That's what they do. They sit at a screen and they have lessons that they're given to them. Sometimes there's a video, and they answer questions at the end. And so there's so much more to it, and I have found that out through this class. Online teaching takes more time than the traditional environment, and through reading the article from Archambault, I know that traditional teaching takes a lot of time. It's not that 40-hour-a-week job that, everybody thinks it is. We take the weekends, we take the nights, even our summers sometimes. And if online teaching is so much more time than that, it seems almost overwhelming, but it seems worth it, because some students need that online environment. Some of the questions that I still have, and probably many more, is how can we incorporate all the labs that we do in our science class in an online environment? So that's kind of one big gap that I still have, is I think about how many times I use a microscope, and I use this equipment and balance and beakers and all of these chemicals, and it's like, how do I do that in an online environment? How do I effectively do that, I guess I should say, in an online environment? And then that kind of leads to my second question is, can a science, specifically biology, because that's what I teach, class be effectively taught in an online setting? I hate to do this, but I always go back to the biology keystone. You know, it's the PA standard, and is a biology class that is taught all online, is it as effective, or even could it be as effective or even more effective than a traditional classroom? So those are kind of my questions. If anybody has any insight, I would love to hear what you have to say, and thank you for listening.